Hi, here we are to continue with our JavaScript tutorial, and in the previous video you started with the breakout tutorial, and if you've completed that you should have your game working here, and maybe it looks something like this, right? I'll refresh that. We got the game, the paddle moves, I can use the arrow keys on the paddle, and the ball bounces and it takes out the bricks, right? We get a score up here in the corner too, so there my score goes up. Okay, so that's really great. The code should pretty much look like what is presented at the end of the tutorial here. Okay, and your code might look a little different, but this is pretty much all the same code, right? So I have the code over here in VS Code, and we're going to talk about that Es Lint thing in a minute. I have the code right here, and you can see there's a lot of code here. So, there's nothing wrong with this code, and there's everything wrong with this code. Okay, so there's nothing wrong with it in that it works, but if we wanted to expand our application and build it into a larger, more robust application with more features, like we wanted to add multiplayer, or we want to add different levels, or we want to add special features, like maybe there's a second ball, the code here makes it difficult for us to do that. So oftentimes when you're building an application, you are just going to make the code work at the beginning. So the first step, this code is fine, okay? The second step, though, we need to write better quality code, okay? And there's a term, it's called technical debt. So essentially, you move forward and you borrow against the future, right? So it's kind of like borrowing money, but what we're doing is we're borrowing time and technology, right? So I'm kind of writing code here. It's like a little loose. It's a kind of just getting things done, kind of proof of concept, just making things work at the beginning. But what that means is I'm taking on some debt that I'm going to have to pay off in the future. Okay, it doesn't pay to pre-optimize. In other words, try and write the most, elaborate, complicated code at the beginning. It's actually better to write simple code that works, and then later go back and refactor to more robust, flexible, and portable code. And that's what we're going to do. Okay. So one of the things that's happening here is, one, we're not using a lot of coding best practices. We've just kind of written code. We've written all the variables with var, and we're not following a coding style. So coding best practices will be ideas that will make our code more efficient and more robust. Coding style is coding or writing the code in a way where the rest of our team agrees it's more readable for everybody. Okay, so in some places people like to put a space around the operator like this, and in other places they like to use the single quote rather than the double quote. And while that sounds kind of trivial, actually, if you're working with a lot of people, and everybody kind of has a different style, it can be really maddening if everybody codes in a different way. If we all code in the same way with the same general style, then it's a lot easier for people to edit and work with the code written by someone else, okay? So we're going to tackle both of those things. And what we're going to do is we're going to use a tool called a linter. And the linter is just a software tool. It goes through your code and it flags things that are questionable. Okay, it can enforce coding style, and we're going to use a rule set from Airbnb, and the Airbnb coding style is what was agreed upon by the engineers at Airbnb, right? So those engineers are pretty clever. They have a lot of experience. Their best practice is probably a best practice that anybody could learn from, right? So let's get started, right? So the goal here is to install Es Lint and then go through and fix all the linting errors. So what I'll do in this video is I'll go through installing Es Lint and getting it started, and then I'll do another video and we'll talk about the linting errors and why, the changes, what changes are being asked to be made, right? And why we should make those changes, right? Okay, so the linter has two parts. One is installed in your code editor, okay? And the other one is installed in the project itself. Okay, so you have to have both of those for the linter to work. Okay, so I'm in VS Code. There's an Es Lint version for just about every code editor. So if you're using Atom, then the procedure is basically the same or very similar for every code editor. You might have to look it up for your particular code editor. In Atom, I'm going to go to the code menu and choose Preferences Extensions, and then I'll search for Es Lint. So you can just type, I've already searched it earlier, but if you just type Es Lint, it'll show up here, and then you can click the Install button, and then it should install Es Lint. Okay? And when you've done that, you've got Es Lint installed in your code editor, and what you want to do next is we're going to install Es Lint into the project. So I have my files for my project in the folder here called Breakout, and what I need to do is I need to go to the terminal and navigate to this directory. So what I'll do is I'll inside the terminal, I'll type cd, and then I'm going to just drag the folder into the terminal, and it'll give me a path to that folder, right? So that's kind of a shortcut. You could type the path too, but if I just drag it in there, it's kind of fast and easy. So now you can see that my terminal shows that I'm in the Breakout folder, and what I want to do is I want to type npm init, okay? And then this is going to initialize an npm package JSON in our folder here, and you'll see that in a moment, right? You can do -y and it'll just say yes to all the questions that come up. I'm going to just say yes to all the questions anyway, but I'll just do it the manual way, right? So I hit return, and then it says, hey, name your package. The default name will be Breakout. That's fine. Version will be 1.0.0. If I want to give it a description, I can type that in. Entry point is main. Test command, I can just hit OK to all those, right? Okay, and what happened here? Well, a moment ago I had 2 files, and now I have 3. So now I have this package JSON file here, okay? So the next step that we want to do is in the terminal, you'll need to type in eslint -- init. And what this is going to do is it's going to configure Es Lint. Okay, so this part we want to be careful because we want to configure it in a specific way to work with us the way that we want to work with it, right? So I'll hit return, and it'll say like, hey, how do you want to use or how do you want to configure Es Lint? Use the arrow keys, right? So I'm going to say let's use a popular style guide, right? Actually, I'm realizing too, the newer version of Es Lint, the questions look a little different, but you want to get the one that says use the style guide, okay? So I'm going to say okay to that, and then it says which style guide do you want to use? So I'm going to use the Airbnb style guide. And do you use React? I'm going to say no, I don't use React. If the, notice the letters here, the lowercase y and the uppercase is n. So the uppercase letter is the default. So if you just hit return, it's going to say no. Otherwise, you can type n, okay? And then it says, what format do you want your config file to be in? So I want to use the JavaScript format, so I'll just leave it at the default, and I'll hit return. And then it says, hey, do you want to install the stuff now? Okay, so I'm going to say, it says, do you want to upgrade? I'm going to say, yeah, let's upgrade, right? So I'll do, yeah, let's upgrade. Now it's going to say, do you want to install with npm now? And I'm going to say, yes, let's install. And then this will take a moment. So it installs a few things, and then you can see it creates a node modules folder, and all the things it installs goes in here, right? Okay, so now that we've got all those things, let's go back to VS Code for a moment, right? And now you can see when I look at my JavaScript file, I have all these red underlines. These are the linter errors. And if I hover over them, you can see that it gives me some options here where it says, returns a reference to an object with a specified name, right? What is this? What else does it say? Unexpected use of var. Use let or const instead. So basically here it's telling me that I should be using const or let over a var, right? So what's the difference? Well, var is hoisted and it's function scope, and those two things make var act unpredictable in some cases, or maybe it does something that surprises you. Let and const are both block scope, so they're more predictable. Let variables can change value, they can be reassigned. Consts cannot be reassigned. So if you have a variable and you're not assigning a new value to it at any point, you're only assigning the value once, a const is better because the computer can act more efficiently knowing that you're not going to change that variable. So we'll go up here and we'll change this to a const, okay? Okay, and then over here now it's going to say, you know what, strings must be single quoted. So I guess the Airbnb team said, you know what, when we're writing JavaScript, why doesn't everybody just write code with single strings, and that'll be less confusing for people, okay? So the CTX never changes, so I'll change that to a const, right? And if I look at the variables here, I'll kind of have to ask myself, because a lot of the errors will come with the var, right? It doesn't like var, it wants us to use let or const. So a lot of the variables here, we kind of have to look at them and ask, like, do they change? So you have to ask yourself, like, okay, if I think back when I wrote the code and I was reading the instructions on the Breakout tutorial, what does this variable do, right? And how is it used? So the ball radius is fixed, like it just sets the size of the ball and it never changes. Like the ball doesn't change size or change radius while the program is running, right? It could maybe if we want to add that feature to the game, but right now it doesn't do that. So this should be a const, okay? The X and Y here are used by the game to keep track of the location of the ball. And so as the ball moves, the X and Y change. So these change, they get reassigned in the future. They should be let. So I'll rewrite these as let. And then you can see here, it doesn't like it if we don't put a space around the operator. I find this to be a lot easier to read myself, so I'm actually behind them on this. I'm going to ignore this error for a minute, right, because it's like document is not defined. Don't worry about that. There's a couple errors in here that might be a little weird, right? Okay, so what else do we have here? dx and dy, these variables change when the ball hits the edge of the screen or bounces off the paddle or a brick, so these should be let. So let's make these guys let. And you know what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to put all the consts at the top. So that'll rearrange my code and make it a little more organized. And I'll put all the lets below it. So, you know, you can do this also for yourself. And I'm going to ask you to do that. There's a lot to learn by going through all the problems here. I'm going to spot a couple problems and point them out. So these paddle height and paddle width don't change, so they should be const, right? And you know, you may run into an error where you make a variable a const, but it should be a let, and you'll see that if you check the console in the browser, the game will break. But if you go and look at the console here, like, you know, for example, if I made x a const like this instead of a let, oops, I misspelled it, no wonder, right? Okay, and then I go to my browser here and I refresh it. You can see the game is not working. If I right click and choose inspect element, then down here you can see I have one error, right? And if I go to the console tab, it'll say type error, attempted to assign to a read-only property. And then it says in draw main.js line 167. Right, so it's saying that down here on line 167, I tried to say x equals a new value, right? And that's not allowed if I declare x as a const. So I'll change that back to a let, and then hopefully everything should be working again. Oh, there we go, and everything's working, right? Okay, so why don't you do that? Go through this, and then I'll make another video, and I'll kind of go over some of the things that that the linter asks for, and we can talk about how to improve the code even further after that, okay? So again, you just want to look at all the variables, decide whether they should be a let or a const. In a couple places, it'll ask you to make some other changes, you know, like spaces around the operators, like this, right? This actually, it'll want to let here. It'll want to space around the operator. This is the plus plus, but this means add 1, but they prefer to do this because it's more clear what's happening, right? So anyway, go through and try and figure out all the linting problems, and then we'll continue this in the next video. So thanks for watching.